Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and Pokémon Heroes is a movie about Pokémon. Yeah, hard as I try, it's proven difficult to come up with a descriptor more fitting than that, but ideally, once we're done analyzing and discussing this film, we'll have a better grasp on what the real point of it is. So, let's get started by taking a look at the plot. The voice acting budget must have been slashed after the disaster that was Pokémon Forever, because there isn't a single spoken word here for a solid 3 minutes. And during those minutes, we get your generic intro that somehow looks even lazier than in the last film. But then, we get a much more interesting tale of how Latios and Latias revealed themselves to humans. I get the idea of creating this unique animation and score exclusive story that seems very biblical in nature, but a little bit of exposition would have gone a long way, because unlike in Pokemon 2000, the actual significance of anything here is never clearly explained. But, interestingly enough, there actually was a voiceover exposition in the Japanese version, but the English version decided to make this portion a silent film, which, in a way, sort of fits, as I'll get to. So, we're introduced to a pair of Team Rocket spies who want to take this blue jewel because, well, Team Rocket. It's kinda what they do. After they escape, we arrive at Alto Mare, where the gang just so happens to be. And guess what? The first thing they do post-intro is race on none other than a body of water. Jarringly overused cliche aside, I think this is one aspect Pokemon Heroes gets right. This Venice-inspired city looks pretty damn good, except for the CGI people lurking around, and this is further emphasized by the score this time around, which does well enough to set the European vibe. It honestly felt like the inspiration for what would later become the music of Kalos, despite that region being a lot more French-inspired. And over the course of the film, I think they make good use of the environment and space as a means to progress the plot. At least, what little plot there is. So Misty ends up winning the water race by a horn, and that's all she wrote. No, really. Hope you enjoyed that, Misty fans, because neither her, nor this random side character, nor even Brock, do anything else for the rest of the film. Ash's racing days are upended due to some late-game hacks by Latias, which marks the start of their connection throughout the film, something we'll talk plenty about. Team Rocket is in this movie. They interact with no one. Moving on. And in comes human girl Latias, who could easily be called both the best and the strangest part of this film. Her lack of a voice is fitting, since her lore to open up this film was also explained through only movements and score. The difference being, it's much easier to understand what Latias is thinking and feeling. And in a series like Pokemon, where subtlety can easily get lost through obvious and overly explanative dialogue, this is one of those times when I think a voiceless Pokemon, at least lacking an English-speaking voice, benefits the handful of scenes human Latias is in. So, after Annie and Oakley fail to capture Latias the first time, they follow Ash and friends into a museum, and now it's time for some good old lore. Basic rundown: Pokemon attacked, Latias said "over my dead body" and drowned them, and then they built a death machine to defend the city. Just your normal, ordinary Pokemon town. Then we're introduced to Bianca, who we later learn inspired Latias' human form. But before that, we need more scenes of Ash running through the streets like this is a Mission Impossible movie. Eventually, after reaching platform 9 3/4, Ash and Pikachu discover a hidden garden where Latios and Latias live. Naturally, Latios is, at first, distrusting of this new, whatever Latias thinks Ash is at this point. I mean, they already held hands twice, so you might say things are getting pretty serious. And you can tell that Ash is getting just a little bit swept away, countering his usual brand of romantic obliviousness standard of most anime protagonists. That is, until he figuratively and literally comes crashing back down to Earth upon realizing the true nature of his Alto Marian fling. All the while, I was half expecting Bayleaf to violently leap out of her Pokeball and start giving Latias yandere death stares. So now that everyone's happy and playing, Latios uses his Vision Share power to give everyone an underwater tour. It's a neat visual, and I think the CGI helps here more than it hurts, but since this water is kind of icky and the canals are tight, there's only so much they can do with this trick. But the Manafi movie would later go on to fully capitalize on what this franchise can do with water aesthetically. So, this scene of frolicking in the garden goes on for way longer than it needs to, all the while Misty and Brock are MIA again because that's just the movie we're in. But then nightfall hits and the Rocket pair decide to steal the Blue MacGuffin as well as Latios himself. Latias manages to escape and recruit the others to stop Annie and Oakley, But then Oakley goes straight up 1984 and decides that a citywide lockdown should be in effect. A convenient trick for literally locking Brock and Misty out of the rest of the movie, and boy, do they ever lay down thick with this one. Between what we see in this movie and the last one, it feels like someone thought it would be really fun to really stretch the limits of Ash's sexuality. So then, Oakley goes nuts and decides that repeated attempts at murder would be just the thing to spice up this flick. Also, I'm not sure where she got the idea that she can rule the world with this thing. Its functionality is, by design, limited in scope. The most you can do is establish a very strict curfew and reenact Noah's Ark, complete with real drownings. But this whole sequence is more funny to me than anything. The reason being is that water has been used and abused as a stairway to the plot for 5 straight movies, and now the water is fighting back. And wouldn't you know it, it's after this movie that we start to see water used less frequently in the films. Probably completely coincidental, but still kind of hilarious. So eventually, the machine goes berserk, which results in the water getting mad enough to want to drown everyone. This leads to Big Brother sacrificing himself for the sake of the city. And, in an unexpected return to my 1984 reference, Big Brother is now, in a way, always watching. This look into Pokemon Death, though, was a pretty captivating scene. I'm not entirely sure, however, what we're supposed to conclude from it, other than perhaps confirming that all Pokemon come from space, or that there is some sort of Poke Heaven and Latios is being returned to Arceus, which wouldn't necessarily contradict the space idea. And so, history repeats itself, mirroring when Alto Mari was first formed, bringing a quiet, poetic close to what was, on the whole, a pointless and rather dull movie. Hey, I think I just found my title. But wait, there's more. The scene that probably drove DeviantArt into a late-night frenzy. So, before the gang leaves, Ash gets a picture and a goodbye kiss from Latias. Yeah, it's played up as trying to be this Inception-style audience interpretation thing, but it doesn't work. Mainly because there is nothing to suggest that Bianca and Ash had any type of chemistry at any point. And unlike the openly flirtatious Melody, nothing about Bianca suggests that she'd end things in such a way. And then the more obvious clue. Latias can't make noises in her human form. This heavy breathing you're seeing? Silent. So unless the sound mixers got real lazy on the last day of filming, this is Latias beyond a shadow of a doubt. And why wouldn't it be? Were these filmmakers really that afraid of borderline bestiality when this exact thing already happened in the anime? If they were going to get cold feet at the finish line, they could have just made Bianca the love interest from the start. They literally wouldn't have to change that much, and they must have known that the fan art was going to flood faster than the city itself anyways. But that's where I'm at with this closing scene. I'm more interested in what the real intentions were, and if they changed at some point, versus the legitimacy of Alto shipping or whatever the hell it's called. Pokemon Heroes is by and large an unnecessary movie. That's part of why this quote-unquote romance is likely the most memorable thing about it. Once you understand the lore of Alto Mare, it's pretty easy to see why the back-end events play out the way they do. But what this movie doesn't have is a strong sense of theme. If you dig deep enough, you can see the undercurrent of history repeating itself because bad people exist in every time period. But at no point is such a theme ever extensively focused on. Nor does anyone symbolize or internalize that theme outside of Latios just repeating what happened years ago. And since Latios himself is a very minor character compared to his sister, not even that really resonates. But you know what could have been a pretty good idea though? Latios knows the history, knows that at some point bad people are gonna come back, and he'll have to sacrifice himself as his father once did. In his mind, history has to repeat itself because his destiny is viewed as unchangeable. But none of that is rooted in love for the city or the world, more responsibility. And then, in comes Latias, a Pokemon / part-time female that does experience the city, does experience its people, and does grow fond of them. Then, when it's time to sacrifice himself, Latios, for whatever reason, is unable to do so. Then, Latias decides to do it herself, because she's got a more powerful reason to. A simple yet effective narrative about destiny's ability to be changed by those with strong enough wills, which would essentially serve as the other side to the Lugia coin, where strong wills fulfilled a positive destiny. Fitting, since these legendaries do look a lot like smaller, color-coded descendants of Lugia himself. And then the end credit tease of Lawrence III makes a whole lot more sense. as well as the idea of water as both a powerful weapon and a source of sustenance and beauty, something else Pokemon 2000 hit on. Perhaps I'm asking too much from a Pokemon movie to have divergent lores connect in such a way, but as is, this movie really is just a movie. It's not going out of its way to be bad like Pokemon Forever, but it's not really actively pushing for anything more than a cute series of visuals. I do like that about this movie though. It does feel a lot more cinematic than the last one I discussed, and takes advantage of the setting in a multitude of ways. But the more I thought about this film, the more apparent it became that it had no interest in being anything more. Even the actual plot is just a random assortment of nice looking things that just happen, with barely any connecting points. Not even Oakley, who ends up consumed by the power she has, is presented as even the slightest bit interesting. So her power rush feels like something that happens because climax, and not something tied into how she progresses as a character. Compare that to Melody from the vastly superior Pokemon 2000. We understand her initial perspective immediately, and then we understand how it subtly changes, as the legends she brushed off come to life right before her. That's what made her an effective and dynamic character, but we don't see that from any of the one-off characters here. All in all, Pokemon Heroes is not a good movie, but it's certainly not without its merits and charm, presented mainly through its use of animation. Ironically enough, a movie where water matters a hell of a lot is also a movie that was severely lacking in depth, and what we ended up with was an hour and change film that emphasized Latias's love life more than Latias's legend, and where Latios' sacrifice comes off as discount Lucario, but with another nice visual tacked on. And as we've discussed, the visual elements present here can be nice, but they ultimately can't carry a movie with noteworthy flaws elsewhere. And with that, we advance one step closer to one of my favorite Pokemon movies and Pokemon ever. I haven't watched this flick since high school though, so I'm really hoping it holds up as well as Pokemon 2000 did. But until then, thanks for watching.